Well, good morning and evening and afternoon, wherever you are. We're back here for a walk in the farm live. I want to show you where we have been walking and talking now from a greater distance, and we're going to take a walk in the garden, and I'm going to also relate where we are and what's happening in this valley relates to the country that we're in and any country. So let me show you right now. I'm going to flip the camera around. So there you see in the distance, if you can see those trees there, those are the cork trees that we've been walking under. And when you've been seeing some of the talks in our channel, those are the cork trees we were walking under. And if you see those mountains there, that's the Drachenstein. And that's exactly where we were flying the drone yesterday. There'll also be episodes of that drone flying down the Berg River, which is at the foot of those mountains that you see there. Quite spectacular. Okay, let's see if we can go over here now. You can see them a little bit more. You can see they're all the way around us. Okay, I'll flip the camera back. So, what does this mean? How does this relate to these farms? What are we talking about here? So, back in the turn of the 19th century, a gentleman by the name of Menzel, and he wrote the first set of documents that were put together by the South African people of that time, which was the Dutch East India Company. Everything is in the context of the Dutch East India Company. Why do we care about all this? Well, as it turns out, this farm, the Zoete De InVal, and the other farm that we've been on for the last year and a half that you've seen in our walks, called Farm Humud, were part of the first farms of South Africa, of Cape Town particularly. And Cape Town is the mother town of South Africa. And why this is interesting in this moment, what we're relating to, is that all these farms were laid out essentially by either outright grants from the Dutch East India Company, or grants of rental or lease. And the farmers would come from Europe, oftentimes on ships owned by the Dutch East India Company, and oftentimes with no money of their own. The Dutch East India Company would put up all the funds. We'll go into the details how that worked. They'd put up all the money. They'd give or lease, depending on who you were and what kind of deal you could negotiate, like 60 hectares, which a hectare is almost 8 acres. So that's 480, almost 500 acres they would give you for coming down here and starting a farm. I mean, can you see how beautiful and gorgeous all this is? I mean, this here, right here, this little garden that we'll walk around, and we have been walking around, is just one little spot all the way around this valley. So what would happen? The people would come into Cape Town, they would they would check in, they would get all their supplies together. It was quite an ordeal with oxen and carts and all of the adventure you might imagine if you saw Out of Africa, and how Meryl Streep took Karen Blixen, Baroness von Blixen, took her wagon into the wilderness to try and go join the Robert Redford character during the war then. You saw how complex it was. Big, tall wagons, full of supplies, all that, absolutely. There was no corner store out here. There was no supply, no known supply of water. The river, which you're going to see in our videos later today, runs along the edge of those mountains, the Drachenstein out there. I say edge, there's plenty of room between the river and the foot of the mountains for other farms that are there now. And if I understand it correctly, all of those were actually part of this farm at one time. Thank you so much for the likes. I really appreciate it, Peggy. We need your support. This farm at one time. Thank you so much for the likes. I really appreciate it, Peggy. We need your support. So they would come out, the farm lessees or the farm beneficiaries, and they would stake their claim. And this happened also in America. This is why South Africa and America are really pretty similar in some ways. And so it's part of why I was motivated to talk about this. My family has deep roots in America, and I resonate with the deep roots that are here on all sides. All sides. There's a farm opportunity was considered like a life-changing event, just like it was in the American history. And so they would come out, and you'd have, say, along the foot of this mountain and this farm here and out around, imagine 500 acre, and some people took more. There was no one to tell them they couldn't take more. The only reason they knew what the northern border of the country was because it was where they would run into the indigenous people of the time. And the indigenous people of the time were referred to in the documents of the Dutch East India Company as the Hottentots. Today we think of them as the ethnic groups, the Khoi and the San. Their children, grandchildren, what have you, were among the folks that we made preps for fertilizer and tea safari, our series on rooibos tea up in the Cedarburg. And so those groups would be out here with a kraal, a big cattle farm. And I say big cattle farm, but it was a herd that was managed by nomads, by nomadic people. And when those herds would get so big that it was unlivable, families would arise within the tribal group, and they would have so many cattle that they were all tripping over the cattle. This is how it's reported anyway in the paperwork of the Dutch East India Company. Then they would, amongst themselves, decide to split. And these are maybe they were the Khoi and the San people, but they were the predecessors of them if it wasn't them exactly. It must have been them because they're a more than 10,000-year-old, maybe more than 100,000-year-old from a genetic point of view group of people. Researching more on that, and I'll share it with you in future programs. But the point is, as we sent a farmer, a white farmer, typically a white farmer, who had made an arrangement with the Dutch East India Company to come here from Europe and was financed to go out into this exact land where we're standing and start a farm, they would bump up against the, hi Robert, they would bump up against the Khoi San indigenous people that were referred to as Hottentots at the time. And that's where they had to sort of consider it a boundary. And by all reports, things got along fairly well. But I want to try to get to a certain set of points, which is who was where, how did anybody keep track, and why did we care? And this is going to be sort of the broad overview of what we'll go into in great detail over the coming year, maybe 2 years it's going to take to cover all this if I get that far. So white farmer has a lease, has a grant to have a farm, comes out here, bumps up against indigenous peoples and their kraal, their big cattle group. Well, the white farmer would like to have some cattle. The cattle that were sent down were not necessarily the best, hardiest animals because they had come on a 6,000-mile journey, maybe further, 8,000-mile journey by sea. And oftentimes they weren't in such great shape once they got here anyway. And they were a different kind of cow. They were a European dairy cow. Here, they were a cattle, almost indigenous wild cattle that were caught and domesticated by the Khoisan people and the indigenous natives here. We see them here. I think they are known. One of the breeds is the Nguni, and we have some Nguni actually in some of our videos earlier in this series, and also in the ones upcoming. And they are biodynamic herds, ones that are raised with no chemicals, and from birth of their parents, from birth of their grandparents, no chemicals with these animals. And so they help make the fertilizers by giving, of course, their feces and eating the grass and digesting it fully. And so the farmers wanted that from the indigenous. A peaceful coexistence. It's actually mostly written as being non-combative. So again, I get sort of stray off my point here. They come out and they're looking to establish a farm, say this one, this big, huge farm. And what's it called? Where exactly is it? Who even knows where it is? Well, the government would occasionally, and when I say occasionally, maybe once in a decade, send out an officer with a little retinue of guys with him and some horses, and they would maybe have some gifts with them for the indigenous people and for the farmers. And they'd go around and they'd say, well, who lives here? And they'd have their records of who had the grant, and yes, it's them. And if you were a lessee, then of course you had to make a payment. And your payment was something on the order of 10% of your crop. And of course you were driving your crop into Cape Town in order to sell it. Mostly all these farms were started to create a resupply station for the Dutch East India Company to go on to the East Indies, which included what was then called Ceylon. Now we know it as Sri Lanka, and also India. And they would stop here at Cape Town, and it was their rest stop. So, okay, we got the lessees, we understand that, the freehold farmers, same thing. In order for them to make a living, they needed to sell their crop. So they had to sell at the prevailing price. They didn't pay the rent, but they still had costs. They had to buy their seed from a government source. There was no one to buy seed from. And so that's how they got it. And of course, all this seed was also coming from Europe. So we have this farm named the Zoete De InVal. That's a name that stuck the fall into sweetness. The Dupuy family, I think, established this place in around 1650. 1650, yes, you heard that right. The current family, who are our hosts and our family by marriage, I'm related to some of them here, and they acquired the farm in the 1850s. Okay, so barely, not even 100 years after America became a country, this farm had already been established for more than a century, and then part of it was traded off to our family, the Frater family, and so here we are again, our family, the Frater family, and so here we are again. They're out, they're checking whose claims would change. So the government here didn't really know who was out here, what farms were here, how big they were, what was going on, until a very concentrated effort had to be made. Well, they also, in that effort, would ask the indigenous people, how do we, how do we call your land? What do we call it? And I'll get into the details of it, but in general, what's interesting and why I'm talking about it today is that when you asked the native peoples, the Khoisan antecedents, the Hottentot, if they will, that's really what the Dutch name was, not considered reasonable name in this era, it's archaic. But those people would say, oh, it's this kraal, and it would be named after the chief. Well, as I told you earlier, the family would get bigger and bigger and bigger. And when there were probably 4 families worth of cattle there, it was pretty unlivable to be in one group. And so they would all agree, yeah, we got to go our separate ways. We've got to split up. Well, this is what spread the northern border of the country of South Africa, is these indigenous people spreading out, because as they moved out, the land that was up against them was so great for farmland, so wonderful. And so the farmers would seek out being close to them, and they liked getting goods from the farmers. Simple trade goods like, you know, if you've studied your history, what did they get? They got tobacco. They loved tobacco. They got brandy. They got mirrors. They got beads. Probably all the same things that Americans gave to our indigenous people. So just what you might expect. But they liked it. It was good. They didn't have any other way to get those things, and they could trade a cow for brandy and tobacco. Well, they also would sell some land, and that land would actually not be for brandy and tobacco. Well, they also would sell some land, and that land would actually not be what was on the books of the Dutch East India Company. Well, what was the name of the land? Well, they would tell them the name of the land. It was the name of the chief. But now they're splitting into 4. Well, it would hold that group. Those 4 people would be, you know, son of chief 1, 2, 3, and 4 as they moved out. But then that chief would die. That son would grow older. No one would know what his father's name was at some point, because it would be changed to his name, and that name's not in the books. So again, the government here doesn't really know who has what. This same problem, by the way, existed in America, and you see it represented a bit in Kevin Costner's new series, which he's only done the first season of, I should say. And there's a place called, I think, New Horizons, and they're selling this place out in the prairie that is a vision of a developer, and the people keep getting killed off in that one, which I don't know. I don't want to relate to the violent part of it right this moment, but no one knew who owned what or what was there in that time. Now, why does it matter? You know, here I am, I have this big farm. It's going concern, it's working. Why do I want to give any of my income, any of my money to this Dutch East India Company, which is the government of the time? Well, where am I going to get my seed from? Oh, I have to get my seed from them. Well, after my farm's going for a while, I can actually kind of produce my own seed. So I don't really have to get my seed from them, but I want them to buy my crop so I can keep getting ready money, so I can keep building more, so I can pay my people. So that being the case, I have to have a positive relationship with my government, the local government. Now, it's even more acute than that in some situations. What do I want to do if, you know, I have a big fire and everything's going to burn down? Do I want to deal with that all by myself independently? What am I going to do when the river runs low and I have no water and I have to get some water? Well, I can go to the indigenous people next to me, and oftentimes I did, and negotiate for some more water. But what I'm getting at is that the collective communal services did have to be supplied for centuries by the Dutch East India Company. I think a couple of centuries. Early on, you have the Portuguese sailing by, Vasco da Gama, a couple of other great explorers that are revered here, and never landed. They just went by and they waved. They stopped at Robben Island to get resupplied. This is what's in the record, but in the research I'm doing now, they said there's nothing on Robben Island. Robben Island, of course, we all know as a prison, so at that time it was just a rock, and so the locals had to bring water out there, had to bring cattle out there to supply the ships that stopped there. And guess why they didn't come on land? They didn't come on land because they were afraid of the cannibalistic Hottentots. Well, how would they ever find out about cannibalistic Hottentots unless somebody had come on land and not gotten eaten and got no way to tell the tale? It was just a silly made-up myth. And a lot of the early history, like the early history of the West in America, it's just stories people told, popular myths. And so, again, going back to what is the map of the regions, you know, here you have these mountains around me, the Drachenstein behind me, this grand range, and the Siemensberg off here going in toward the south, and Franschhoek, and then there's the opening to get to Cape Town. All these things are not what the people here called them. So they had to make maps in order to know what was here. And they had to find out who was doing the work of settling the land in order to figure out how to gather, collect resources. You know, colonialization was not an easy game. It's amazing how complicated it is. It's also amazing how balanced it was with self-interest. The self-interest part we're going to go into later, but it's very much at the core of the American founding, mutual self-interest, and here it is here too. So what else can I share with you? We are relating the farms that are here and were here to the indigenous people that were here, and how were they moving through, and relating that also to what was our experience in America and other colonial countries. We had the British coming in and doing the colonialization of our country, and of course the Canadians had the Hudson Bay Company. So I think we had British East India Company, just like there was Dutch East India Company, as I recall. So quite an amazing thing. I can also show you a bit of the garden here. Let's let you see the garden. And I don't know if there's, let's see, I'm going to flip the camera around and let you see what's happening here. So there is the Drachenstein over the, I'm going to flip the camera around and let you see what's happening here. So there is the Drachenstein over the fountain. This is one of our, set. We had kind of the unfortunate, I'll show you, there's some of the first fruit right there. We had the unfortunate situation set. We had kind of the unfortunate, I'll show you, there's some of the first fruit right there. We had the unfortunate situation of with what look like orange here, and you see quite a bit of blossoming here. And it looks probably to you like an orange tree, but in fact, and we're going into spring here, by the way, we're in the southern hemisphere. So look at all those blossoms. As you can see, there is already fruit here. Well, this is an antique lemon. And so you see up there, you can see how crinkly and wrinkly that is. And I can show you one. These are what they look like. This one has a lot more of them. These are antique lemons. And right next to this lemon tree is a plum tree, which actually I think it's maybe apricot. You're welcome to leave me a note. You're welcome to leave me a note. This is a lime tree, motorized squeezer, juicer. not quite, almost industrial grade, a prosumer one. Probably done nearly 800 limes. And there's a nice bird's nest up in there. In the evening, I'll do some of these lives in the evening for you guys. We get about 1,000 or 2,000 birds. You can hear them in the background now, but they come in the evening, and our gardener, who's our partner in making this garden so beautiful, Paul, he weed whacks the middle, which I don't particularly like, but and he doesn't do it that often, you can see, but it knocks down all the seeds and blossoms, and the birds just have a field day eating all this. Let's see if I can walk you around. This is our meditation walk. You can see it's laid out here. Let's see if I can walk you around. This is our meditation walk. You can see it's laid out here. And these are a couple of avocado trees and a broccoli keeping them company. We have little guilds. We were told that's the way to do it, is to have food guild company. We have little guilds. We were told that's the way to do it, is to have food guilds and tree guilds. Here's another lemon. Eat it one thing. Getting vitamin B, not getting very sweet, are important things. This is our dandelion bed. You can see it's been walled off here. These big high stone walls. And so we're getting ready for having these big high stone walls. And so we're getting ready for having, that's a good story in itself. Here's the fairy meeting place. And I'm not sure what this one is. I think this one is maybe a kind of mint. I'm not sure what that is. We've got lots of lettuces. We have a yarrow. And the whole thing is coming up really quite nicely. Here's our Three Sisters experiment, where we have corn and beans. I think these are a thing called a blue bean. I believe that's what they are. And they're a thing called a blue bean. I believe that's what they are. And they're corn and beans and pumpkins. Climb up, and the pumpkins shade them. These are things us white people learned from the indigenous peoples. Well, I'm told, that's the legend I was told. And then we have these great tomatoes. And these tomatoes are on obelisks that some were here and I repaired and some I made. These are all ones I repaired, but these tomatoes are quite interesting. These three tomatoes, this one going crazy already, realize that this is we just had the vernal equinox. So this one going crazy already. Realize that this is we just had the vernal equinox. So it's just spring. And here we have some nasturtiums. So it's just spring. And here we have some nasturtiums, which we use in our salads. And those tomatoes that you saw, that are big and tall, actually came from out there at our front gate, which is actually where people often dump the trash, believe it or not. And somebody had thrown out a salad or something, and you see the blossoms are there already on this one. And there were hundreds of tomatoes on these, and it was growing on the ground into our landscaped garden out front. It's kind of funny to have this landscape garden here, but it's a bit of the legacy of the colonial history. And next door there used to be the tasting room of the winery. And, let's see over here. We can see that. This is the pergola that we made. Now all of this tube thing is going to be covered as the season goes on with squash. To be covered as the season goes on with squash, beanies, and we'll also have pumpkins going over them. So that's what this was built for. Here we have some onions, more yarrow, some chard, and lots more tomatoes. Here's a found loco weed that was also out by the side of the road. Somebody had thrown down a whole bag of seeds, and we just said, well, we can't just leave it out here to die. So we brought it in, gave it a home. Now, you could try and guess, can you guess what are these? These guys, last year when we were at the other farm, these plants, there's one going up each pole of the pergola here. So we have 4 of them. So here's one that's taken off big time. What is it? What is it? What do you think that is? These are kiwi. Here's one that's taken off big time. What is it? What is it? What do you think that is? These are kiwi. Yes, kiwi. And they have not yet. So that's what we have there. And let's see what else is going on. I think I could talk a little bit more about our subject of the map making, and we'll be close to the end of this episode. So yesterday we took a walk. Part of what's way back where I was showing you, let's see if I can get somewhere where I can show it to you. I'm going to walk over and show you a view of the mountains again. I realize this program is a bit of a hodgepodge still, but hopefully you find that entertaining, and if you're trying to go to sleep, I can put you to sleep. Oftentimes I listen to meditations to put me to sleep, Dharma talks. So let me turn the camera around again. And so you see out there, that is actually the pasture. We had some cattle here up until a couple of days ago. They're in a lot of the earlier films. They're not, I don't think they were Ingoonis. I think they were European bred cattle, but they were bred here, but they were, I don't think they were Ingoonis, which are indigenous cattle. But anyway, they were sent off to the abattoir, as is the farmer's right to do. And oh, there's somebody got by me. Hi, Sally. Just try to say hi to who I can. Hi, Paula. Paul, sorry. Hi, Paul. Hi, Tammy. Hi, Patricia. Nice to see you all. Thank you for joining. I'm showing you the pasture lands that, if you look way far in the distance there, you can see on one side, well, all of that's the Siemensberg. Those mountains are all the Siemensberg. And these mountains that you see over here are the Drachenstein. And so yesterday's walk, which you've seen some of in my videos the last few days, last week, walking out there under, those are the cork trees. Off in the distance, I think I can zoom in for you. Yeah, there you go. Those are literally the cork trees that they would make corks from. Well, beyond there are massive strawberry fields. And when you say strawberry fields forever, if you Google my name, Brian Hofstetter, and strawberry fields forever, you'll see the video of strawberry fields all the way as far as you can see in every direction. It's just amazing. And there's going to be some more video today on seeing the workers coming out to harvest them. And so that is over that way that you're looking right now, just past those trees. And those trees, all of that stuff is about a 15-minute, 20-minute walk from here. The strawberries are about a 20-minute walk, Jake the snake, to get across. And then you're at the grapes. And the grapes are about another 20, 30-minute walk. So to get across this farm is a couple of hours of walking, which is not probably a big deal if you come from Iowa and you're a corn farmer. But it's amazing big deal here for me. And there is a river running through it. A river runs through it. I love that. I think we say R.I.P. Bob. And it's called the Berg River. And it was the main source of water supply for all the farms here in the beginning. And it's fresh water running all the way down into Cape Town, I believe. And we flew over it with the drone yesterday, and so you're going to see that. I'm going to try to figure out how I can have live sessions with the drone flying and telling you where things are. And if I really could get it all together, I'll be able to superimpose the map lines of the antique maps. I don't want to interfere with people's privacy so much, so I'm not concerned about who owns what now, where. What I'm mostly concerned about or interested in is what were the historic antecedents of all this. And it's quite interesting. You know, Tolkien was born very close to where I'm standing right now. I believe I looked it up a couple days ago. It's about 500, 600 miles from here, plus or minus. And he lived here until he was 3, maybe going into his 4th year. And his son came back here and trained people during World War II to be pilots. And toward the end of the war, he was down here training people to be in the South African Air Force. And that's quite amazing. The reason I mention Tolkien right now is that the maps that you'll see, the actual historic maps that I'll be showing in these videos, look like Tolkien drew them. They look like the maps in the early versions of The Hobbit. Now, I'm not talking about the ones that Christopher drew in the recent, for the movies that were even further glorified by Peter Jackson and his team, but the original little scribbling drawings that Professor Tolkien drew. And it was so amazing to flip through these pages and see, wow, shark bite, and see these maps drawn, and the descriptions are in there of the corporals and captains who rode out to find out who was living out here, what was the state of the settlement, and they would have to come back to the governor and do a report. Another thing on my mind that I'll share with you as we get to closing time here is that we do have a really lovely step-by-step description. If you've ever been to Edinburgh, if you haven't, you should go. They have something at the Edinburgh Castle called the tattoo at the end of the day. And the tattoo is the handoff ceremony of handing over of the guard. And what's so fun and amazing about it, at least for me, is that the daytime team are all in kilts and have these glorious tall bear hats that are similar to the ones at Buckingham Palace. And somebody's going to kill me for that, but they do have some hats like that, and they also have their tam o'shanter style hats, and they're marching and they're playing the band, and they have their weapons of regalia, and the guys who come in to replace them after dark are all in fatigues, and they have black automatic weapons, and they're like ready to go are all in fatigues, and they have black automatic weapons, and they're like ready to go super elite commando team to take over for the night. So that changing of the guard is called the tattoo, and you can Google Edinburgh Castle tattoo and see it 100 times over. It gets a big attendance during the Edinburgh Festival and the Fringe. I was there for 3 summers in a row, and I highly recommend it. So here they also have a castle in Cape Town, and that castle was the main seat of the governor, at least his business seat, probably not his house, but his business seat where he was all day, every day, conducting the affairs of state.